rest of the world was either a curiosity or a nuisance. Fans were a nuisance. The writers were a real nuisance. And the moon landing, well, that was interesting. It was interesting for a few minutes in the bullpen conversation. Well, what about the moon landing? Well, forget the scientific achievement of it all or the historic nature of it. What about the moon landing? Seattle pilots' view of the moon landing was summed up very, very well, I thought, when one of the players said, "That's a long time to go without sex." And the least they should have done was to supply some germ-free broads for these guys.
I obviously wasn't very sophisticated in the ways of sports business back then, but it didn't seem to make any sense. I had read stories about the travail, financial travail the team was in, but it just seemed unconscionable that a major league operation would move a team after a single year.
There was no major league ready stadium. The pilots had not done well in their first year, and it was during a time of bust in Seattle. There was signs, billboards up around town saying, you know, will the last person who leaves Seattle turn out the lights, because Boeing had been having a hard time. So there was not a lot of money free.
The now commissioner of baseball, Bud Selig, had an empty stadium in Milwaukee because Bud, who was the principal owner of the Milwaukee Braves, lost his Braves to Atlanta. So County Stadium was just sitting there, a major league ballpark.
When Selig read in the newspaper that the pilots were having trouble and might relocate, he contacted Dewey Soriano about possibly buying the team and moving it to Milwaukee. What we didn't know was, during one of the games of the 1969 World Series, in a private suite, I believe it was beneath the portrait of Gus Triondo, who is a former catcher for the Baltimore Orioles, Selig and Soriano reached a secret agreement to sell the team and move it to Milwaukee.
One day in Chicago, all the American League baseball owners, from Gene Autry right on down the line, met in Chicago, and they decided to take that franchise away from Seattle and move it to Milwaukee. Had they waited maybe 2 more months, the Kingdome would have been on the drawing board at the time, and that franchise would have stayed.
It was a very sad time for all of us who had worked so hard, you know, to get the Kingdome bill passed and to get the franchise here and do all the work that it took to get the franchise here, and putting the player personnel and the scouts and the off front office and everything together, and then have it evaporate after 1 year.
So all of us went to Tempe, Arizona again, and before it was official and became the Milwaukee Brewers, we were into spring training games, and Jimmy Dudley and myself had to do the games as the pilots for a while. Then that day came when it was official, and I believe it was 4 games, as I recall, we broadcast as the Milwaukee Brewers. Now that was tough to take. And then when spring training was over, they were going to Milwaukee, Jimmy Dudley and I were going back to Seattle with no ball club.
This can't be. They're not going to do this after a year. Give it a chance, for gosh sakes.
I'll be honest with you, I was crestfallen. I couldn't believe it. Because we'd worked so hard to get Major League Baseball in Seattle.
Really wasn't a surprise. We had a terrible feeling that it was going to happen. It was a sad time for the city of Seattle. It shouldn't have happened.
I believe the Soriano brothers were hung in effigy below the monorail track.
Whether the pilots were attracting enough attention to remain in Seattle, or whether they might move or get sold, I don't think that ever crossed my mind.
I was too busy dodging line drives and stuff myself, you know, much less to worry about them.
I was devastated when I found out the team was leaving, because I never got a chance to go to a game with my dad. It was one of those we'll do it next year type things, and there was no next year.
Go, you pilots, go, under the bluest sky. Go, you pilots, go, around the bases fly, when the field is dry.
Even if you weren't born then, even if you've moved to Seattle only recently, the story of this thing is still fascinating, and it's still, I think, from those people who have been here, who have those memories, there's a certain affection for that period in Seattle sports history.
We're gonna pound that bud, the bluest skies you've ever seen, yeah. When Barry Como sings, I don't wanna wake from this dream, yeah. Seattle's got a big league team. Seattle's got a big league team. Go, you pilots, go. Why don't you go so fast? No, Milwaukee, no. We're gonna sue your ass. We're gonna sue your ass. You took our team too fast.
The utter freakiness of the Pilots, a one-year team, and there was so much goofiness that Bouton immortalized that the team and its image, just the idea of a one-year team, became endearing.
And they were just a marvelous collection of guys. Fred Talbot, Ray Euler, Don Mincher, these guys were just fantastic. And because they were from all different teams, they were playing together for the first time, and so they were getting to know each other. So they were all telling each other their stories. So as a writer, I was able to get all the great stories from the Minnesota Twins from Don Mincher, the Boston Red Sox stories from Gary Bell, the Detroit Tigers stories from Ray Euler, Kansas City stories from John O'Donohue. It was as if somebody put this team together and said, well, they're not going to win many ball games, but if somebody writes a book, this was a hell of a ball club.
You pilots run. Slide, you pilots slide. Go, you pilots go.